Okay, we're going to look at some skipping patterns here. And these are less busy than the really syncopated patterns than the boom chick type of thing. They're similar to an arpeggio where you might be playing a chord and that's kind of broken up one note at a time. Although there is room to put in pinches and a lot more that you can come up with some of these patterns. So let's just take an E major chord for now. Again, these should work on any type of chords you can come up with. But I'm just going to take an E major for now. And we're going to be covering all 6 strings in kind of a unique way. So let me just start the pattern for you, one example, and then we'll go back and look at it a little bit closer. So thumb on the low E string first. Then thumb jumps down to the D string, or jumps up. Index on the G, middle on the B. Okay, then the thumb comes to the A string, then thumb on the D string, index on the G, and then ring finger on the E. Okay, that's one time through the pattern. So let me play that all the way through, repeating it so you can get a little bit better feel for the phrasing. So you can see I'm skipping over strings here. That's where it gets the name. Not only is the thumb skipping a string, it doesn't play consistently through all the time. Sometimes your fingers are going to be skipping a string within the pattern. So that's one pattern to try with. Now if you had like the same pattern but you had a chord, let's say I'm using this G major 7th chord, or some chord where you couldn't really use all the open strings, because you notice when I played the E major I was able to use the open E, B, and low E string, but you can't always do that depending on what key you're in or what chord you're playing. So you're going to have to modify the pattern a little bit. And this actually goes, this is a true rule of thumb for any of the patterns you're going to do or banjo rolls, is if you're playing a chord what doesn't allow you to play the exact pattern that we looked at, you might have to modify it a little bit. So let's look kind of a modified version of that last pattern, where I'm just going to play the thumb going from the E string to the D string, but it's never going to come to the A string because I don't want that string playing. So if I took the same thing, I'm actually going to let the E string ring open on the high E string because we can, but I'm not going to play the A string open. So here's an example of that really slowly. Thumb on the E, thumb on the D, index on the G, middle on the B, then the thumb comes back to the E this time, thumb on the D, index on the G, and ring finger on the E. So let's make a loop of that so you can hear what it sounds like. Okay, you might do the same thing, another variation. Say you had like this C major 7th, and you didn't want to play either of the E strings, or you were in a key where you couldn't use those. Here's the same type of skipping pattern, not using either of those strings. So I'm only using the A, D, G, and B string, but I still try to keep the pattern, the feel of the pattern, as intact as possible. Alright, so here's that example. I'm going to go A string with a thumb, A string with a thumb, D string with a thumb, index finger on the G, middle finger on the B, and I'm just going to repeat the same thing again. So I would just repeat that. Now you could also, with your right hand, vary it a little bit. In that case where you're not really skipping too many strings, you're just playing more of an arpeggio, you could do this kind of thing. Thumb, index, middle, ring. But I like the idea of keeping the thumb moving as much as possible. That also frees up your ring finger, which you can use to play maybe a melody or something like that. So let's take those ideas there, the skipping patterns. We're going to plug it into a little progression, and this is just a progression I came up with when I was thinking of something that would sound nice with these different skipping patterns. And we're going to look at this progression later on with some other patterns as well. So it's B minor. Now this is a B minor major 7th is what this chord's called. Alright. and then to a B minor 7th, to a B minor 6th. Alright, then we're going to go to an E minor 7th, or actually an E minor 9th, excuse me. Like that. And then a G7 with the sharp 11 note. It's a fancy one there. And then a C sharp minor 7 flat 5. You could play it this way, or maybe this way if you wanted to. Either one of those. And then an F sharp 7th, and I'm also going to add in this sharp 5th note there. Okay, so there's the chord progression. And you can come up with any way you want to phrase this. You know, if you wanted to play a full measure with each chord and then switch, you might switch the chords halfway between the measures, so 2 beats on each one. Whatever you want to come up with. For now, I'm just going to stick with each chord getting its own measure. So I'm going to play the pattern once over each chord, and then switch to the next chord. Okay, so let's give it a try here, see what we come up with. Okay, so I had to actually modify as I went, depending on what chord I was playing, whether I was going to leave out a treble string, you know, like a melody string on top, or maybe a bass string I had to skip over. So I'm just kind of doing that on the fly as I go, making sure that if there's a note that's in the chord I don't want to ring out, I just skip over that. Okay, and I actually ended up playing it twice through each pattern there. I said I was going to do once, but I did twice. So you might have caught that. So see what you can come up with there with different progressions, different types of chords, but keeping the pattern the same and always trying to skip, keeping the thumb moving as much as you can. And this is kind of a nice style of the skipping pattern.